Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Night at the Movies. It's where I take a look at a movie, be it in theaters or movies that are already released. I give my thoughts on the movie I had watched, and today I actually stumbled upon a movie online, and thus I shall review it here. Today I watched the children's movie that I did, titled under either Ooops, Noah's Gone, 2x2, or All Creatures Big and Small. Now, I know none of you have likely ever heard of this movie. Even the info on it is a bit scarce. Just look at how many talents it has, surely it didn't do too well. Well, I watched it. I won't be going too long, or so I hope, on this. The movie is about the animals who didn't make it onto the ark. I know most of you have heard of the biblical story of Noah's Ark and all, though this film isn't really a religious film. The closest connection is the Ark and the Flood, really, along with the obvious Noah references. There are humans, but the film centers around the animals and you never see them. But anyway, let's begin, shall we? The king of the animals has called together all the animals, the carnivores and the herbivores to be exact. No idea where the omnivores are, but all well. Oh, and on a side note, am I the only one who thinks the king lion looks like the villain from Madagascar 2? Oh well. Maybe they had a copyright issue, who knows. The king of the animals, the lion as I shall call him, says he has been named the captain of the ark by Noah himself. There is a rule that carnivores cannot eat the herbivores, and yeah, you all heard of that. I think that's gonna go well. These are all the side points that don't affect the film too much. All the animals are allowed on the ark, but only if you're on Noah's list, of course. Well, our main characters are two fantasy creatures called Grumps and Nestrians. Grumps being a carnivore and Nestrians being herbivore. Grumps pretty much seem like a cross between fox and wolves, and maybe a small big cat. You can tell based on the appearance, and they are loners. Nestrians, well, look at the movie poster, you can tell me what they look like to you. Skipping ahead a bit, Nestrians are allowed on board, so the father, which is named Dave, dresses them up as Grumps and tries to get on board. This works, even though the outfits are completely and clearly fake. Here is where I notice all the animals were called, but it seems only two exist in this species. Sure, I know the story of the ark and all, but I'm not taking into consideration the biblical story much here, as it has very little to do with any of the movie. The reference of Noah is all there is, like I stated before. But yeah, it seems odd that there are only two of every animal around. Leah is the daughter of the mother Grump, named Hazel, so there is a question raised there. How do they... Never mind. I don't even know why I mentioned this entire first bit of the movie here. You could literally skip the first 18 minutes or so, and the movie would still make sense to you. But yeah, now on to what I call the second act. The animals are on board and the flood begins. Leah and Finney's the son of Dave, by the way, sneak off as Leah didn't believe the flood was happening. She wanted to see it with her own eyes, as she says. So she goes to see for herself. However, they step off the ark unknowingly and find out too late they're on the wooden planks surrounding the ark. The ark takes off, leaving the other two behind. There are two griffins throughout the entire movie, by the way, and they try to hunt the entire movie long. They're pretty much the only villains you'll see in the movie. And once they see Lee and Finney, they're trying to go for them, not the last time of the movie, trust me. Like, it's not annoying or anything, it just happens a lot. Anyway, the ark has set off and all, leaving Leah and Finney behind. The two griffins try to hunt them, they fail, and then the two little ones have to make shelter for the night. Finney offers Leah to come with into his shelter. She rejects because Grumps are loners, as said before, and said many more times throughout the movie. It rains and Leah's shelter fails, so she goes into Finney's shelter. The next morning it is seen that Finney has built his own boat, Nestrians being great at building things, but it floats away before they could get onto it. Right after that, the Griffins return for their second attempt. This goes on until the two run into a giant rock-seeming creature thing, and the Griffins fly off. The rock creature being thing is called Ooops, and there's a parasite attached to his head. I can't remember if they did give him a name or not. But yeah, the little team then sets off to try climbing to the top of this mountain, hoping to signal the Ark and get rescued and meet with their parents once again. This whole time the water levels are rising, as to be expected. It is the flood after all. Back on board, the mother, Grimp, Hazel, and the father, Nestrian, Dave, are thrown into a place that, because they are deemed stowaways for causing too much trouble, they make plans to escape the containment room and eventually do so, making their way all the way to the captain's quarters before long. This takes place in like 10 minutes of the movie, by the way. Of course, through sneaking around because they had to get by the gorilla guards, which there are lots of, even though they seem to only use 2 animation models, but oh well. Anyway, I don't know why I keep going into little details like this. I'm sure you don't need a play-by-play. Anyway, they make it to the captain's quarters, but he isn't reasonable with their demands to turn the vessel back around and pick up the children. Thus, Hazel knocks him out, being the more violent of the two. Dave then turns the vessel back around towards the mountain, which, at this point, the mountain is just the peak of it, peeking out of the water. Meanwhile, back on land, the Fearless Four, as the team had named themselves, encounter the Griffins again. There is a joke within this scene that I actually laughed at. I won't spoil too much of what happened here, but there was a Tetris joke, and you all know how I love Tetris. It was actually quite funny and well made. Speaking of, the film isn't much of a comedy. It's an adventure-type movie, and though it may be claimed to be in the genre of comedy, it's not really that funny. They don't make that much jokes. Encounter over. Leah splits from the group because she says she is a loner, and thus she shall continue on without their help. This doesn't last long, because literally a minute later, she nearly dies because part of the path up the mountain collapses. But the other 3 save her in time. She then rejoins the group and starts to warm up and become friends with the rest of them. Skipping ahead to where the plot picks back up, and don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the breaks. They weren't too long, but I do love when a movie lets you rest. I do not like a constant action. But yeah, later on, the 4 try escaping the cave as it floods around them. Ooops falls off a cliff and into the water. He is presumed dead by all of them, pretty much. You'll see what happens. Thusly, the remaining 2, Finney and Leah, continue their way until they reach the top of the mountain. The Ark is soon in sight and eventually makes it to the mountain, but by the time the Ark had reached it, the mountain was fully submerged. Finney and Leah cling to a piece of ice that floats by and try to get in contact with the Ark to pick them up. Finney falls into the water as Leah is picked up. She then tells Dave that Finney is in the water and drowning, and they all go diving in to get him. He seems to be dead, but then suddenly it's found that Nestrians can swim, and this was the place they belong at last. Nestrians before them were wanderers trying to find their place to live, by the way. It said so earlier in the film, and many times throughout it. However, the happiness is cut short by the Griffins making their final return trying to catch these. Surprisingly enough, though, Ooops returns and eats the 2 Griffins, even if it was accidental. It is found that Ooops was actually a whale this whole time, and he didn't know his place either. Sure, it don't make much sense to me finding out that they are aquatic even though they've been on land the entire movie, but okay, you're not supposed to think too heavily, I guess, in a children's movie. Hazel and Leah, meanwhile, are running out of air, and thus Dave gets Ooops to help them get back to the Ark. From here, Dave goes back into the water with Finney to live out their new lives in the water, presumably staying near the Ark until the 40 days and 40 nights are over, so they can keep in contact with Leah and Hazel as they are newfound friends of Dave and Finney's. This is where the movie ends, and no end of the flood or anything, it just ends. Okay, so the movie ends there. It's not an abrupt end or anything. It was done well. The whole film is quite pretty in its scenery, especially considering it wasn't made by a big corporation like Disney, Sony, or any other of those big film companies known for their animation. It really is animated very well, too. I do love the scenery and all. You may be wondering, is the movie bad? Oh, certainly not, at least in my mind. It was entertaining enough for me, even though things were questionable at times, like the whole aquatic thing. But otherwise, I didn't think too hard on the film. I gave it a fair chance and certainly approve of it. It's certainly for children, yes, but it was still decent enough. It isn't irritating or anything like other children's movies can be. It was respectable. It knew what it was and its idea behind it, and it is done quite. Sure, you may not enjoy it being likely older than the intended audience, but it's a good enough movie nonetheless. Sure, I'm older than the intended audience, of course, but I surely wasn't insulted. It was a family film, a good one for what it was. It wasn't horrible, awful, or anything like that. It was just good. Good enough. Now, of any movie I've seen, I would say is most closely like the Ice Age movies, especially Continental Drift with the rising water aspect and all, especially in its style. The movie really does seem like an Ice Age movie, just without the Ice Age characters. It isn't a rip-off, but you'll see what I mean if you find the film for yourself. Only buy it or watch it if you're curious about it, though it would certainly service as a film for family night, especially with the children aspect in it. All in all, it was a good movie. It wasn't awful or horrible, and I'm not going to sit here and overreact like some others likely would. It is a good movie, and it works for what it is. If you were wanting to see a religious film about the flood and all, then this isn't going to do it for you. It's not religious. I don't mind that at all. It's a good film for what it is. Yeah, pretty much just repeating myself at this point. Sorry about that. All in all, good movie for what it is. Yeah, likely not the reaction some of you would expect from me, but I honestly didn't mind it. It was a good enough film as it is. I enjoyed the animation and visuals, and the story was, well, enough on its own. Solid A in my book, maybe an A- at lowest, but it's really not that bad. Again, family movie and a children's movie, but in that genre I've seen much worse. Oh well, hope you enjoyed yourselves, and if you want to watch the movie, go ahead, I won't stop you. I literally can't. Just take into consideration what I've said in this video in case you don't like certain things. Anyway, this has been Nanny, and I wish you all a very good day. Bye bye.